Brisbane, as well as the traditional owners of the land in which all of our Zoom audience are joining us from, as we're live streaming across the country tonight. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. Some housekeeping for the audience. If you do need the bathroom tonight, we'll use the ones inside, which are just behind the counter and up the stairs. And if you haven't purchased the book already, we've got plenty of copies at the counter, so you can grab it afterwards. And if you're joining us on Zoom, we'll paste the link where you can purchase online. We will have some time for a Q&A at the end, so please save your questions until then, and then we'll get to them in about the last 10 minutes. And if you're on Zoom and you have a question, please type them into the chat box and we'll try to get them across as well. And afterwards, we will have Helen signing some copies as well, just by the front door. And finally, if you could just take a moment to pop your phones on silent, that would be greatly appreciated. Now, I know we have a lot of family and friends here who know Helen already, and after tonight's discussion, I'm sure we'll know you even more, but just a little bit of background about Helen. Born in 1945, Helen Yeates grew up in Brisbane, daughter of a secretary and an aviation weather forecaster. She taught at various secondary schools and trained teachers at UQ and beyond. She became an award-winning film and media academic at the Queensland University of Technology, nurturing some of the brightest young filmmakers of the next generation. For the past 10 years, she has been an associate professor at QUT. Helen is also a filmmaker, a festival judge, a woman who is tangled with celebrities at the same time hosting legendary parties and elegant salons. Now, helping launch this wonderful book into the world is Sandra Hogan. Sandra is a Brisbane journalist and writer. Her non-fiction spy story, With My Little Eye, was published by Allen and Unwin in 2021. Please put your hands together in a warm welcome.
Okay, so it's lovely to see everyone here tonight, and I'm just going to do a bit of a teachery thing. And I just want to show everyone who's here, really. And so in little clusters, if that makes sense. So I've got family here. So could family put up their hands or stand up? Margie and Jerry at the back, they feature in the book, and Jan, cousin Jan in particular, in the early parts. And so that's the family here tonight. Others are on Zoom, including my brother, all the way from Oxford. Yeah. And so then there's people I went to primary school with. So can you put up your hands? Come on. Where's Janet? Yes. And Wendy. Yes, 4 of us here tonight. And so then there's people I went to secondary school with as well. Yeah, some of that overlapped, of course. Yeah. And then people I taught with at various locations. So where are those people? QUT and Ipswich Girls Grammar, probably they're the main ones. And then people I taught at high schools. Wonderful Janetta, who's a star in the book there. And then people I taught at QUT. I think quite a few of you darlings are here tonight. Yes, you are. And so, and then there's people I work with through the Australian Teachers of Media. And we have Amy here tonight from Brisbane State High School. And also there's a Australian Teachers of Media party going on Zoom, I think, while they watch this tonight. So welcome to them as well. Okay, everyone, back to Sandra, who'll be asking me searching questions.
That's it. So, because you haven't all read this yet, I'll tell you the very first most fascinating thing about this memoir is the era it's set in. And as you know, Helen's a war baby and born in Brisbane. And she would have been like a happy ending for the Thompson family because they'd been through a very scary war, being evacuated from Darwin to escape the Japanese bombing. And she first lived in her grandmother's home with 3 generations living together, supporting each other. That was that world at the time. And then, you know, from the age of 12, she lived for 30 years under a period of political repression, which is actually even hard to imagine now, right here in Queensland. So I'll be, you know, really interested in talking to her about that. And she was part of the student revolutionary movement in Queensland. And she also survived the era of free love and is here to tell the tale. And was part of that, you know, kind of founding feminist movement of this, you know, this post-war period as well. So, so the second fascinating thing about the memoir is the person it's written about, which is why I guess so many people have turned up tonight on this cold and rainy night. And she grew up at a time when there weren't careers for women laid down and no expectation that they need an education. And she found her own way through life, and she made it up as she went and invented a whole new career, as I understand it, really, this whole film study thing. She's had a very exciting love life, and she's got more friends than anyone I know of all different ages. So, I mean, I think she's just one of the women who changed the rules for all of us women and made life more interesting and freer for us all. So tonight I just thought you know, some of these topics are just so fascinating. So I want to talk to her about politics and feminism and love and film. But I'll start where the book starts, which is actually it's the sad part of the book, really, isn't it? That but because the amazing things that you've achieved in your life, Helen, haven't all come from a grand plan, and accidents have played their part in your life, and the way you've adapted to them has been significant. And you start this book with the story of a terrible accident that happened to you as a young woman. And I wonder if you could just briefly tell us what happened on that rainy night in May 1963.
Right, rainy night. Thanks, Sandra. Yes. Do I stand up? Or what?
Can you see?
No.
No?
Okay. Right. Yes, some of you know about it all too well. But yeah, I was just with my boyfriend at the time, and somehow or other he swerved off Coronation Drive into a post. And back then in 1963, there were no seatbelts. So I just went flying through the windscreen and ripped my head and my face and everything apart, and lots of broken bones and brain damage and whatever. You can read all about the gory details in chapter 1 or skip them. But I don't think there was anything filmic actually about my car accident. But I sort of wove into the book all the way through, as those who've read it will know, my love of films and my feelings about different films that inspired me or that helped me make sense of what the hell was going on in my life. And I was very lucky. I got to the hospital thanks to a couple of doctors dressed in sailor suits going to a fancy dress party, and they stopped, thank heavens. And then I got to the hospital just 20 minutes with 20 minutes to spare, as Polly and Jan would remember in particular. And of course, little Margie, she was only a little tot at that point. But yeah, so it was pretty dramatic, and I did suffer amnesia, which I'm sort of fascinated by. Of course, everyone's fascinated by amnesia. The one thing everyone will do is, of course, turn to the photographs, I think, in the book. And yeah, so I'm rabbiting on a bit now.
Tell us how you put it at the beginning, and I had the sense that you did that because it had an influence on the rest of your life, and it kind of helped to shape some of the decisions you made and the way things were. So how did that accident shape
I
your
was 2 years in convalescence, and the brain surgeons and people, they all said I would not be able to ever study again. And so I somehow overcame that. I was determined to show them that I could study. But that was a challenge because I got to uni 2 years late, and of course everyone was 2 years younger. But there were some other mature age. I was a mature age student, and somehow I just stuck to my guns and studied hard and did well at uni. And you know, I write about that and my sex life there, and you know, and you know, how all the Catholic girls were extraordinary at university. They were all finding their sexuality very early in their time back in 1965, the year I went to uni. And of course, one of them had to help me lose my virginity. So, but you'll read about that. Yes. And I was a bit worried that I'd sort of, because my face was all ripped apart and quite ugly, I just was always worried that people would turn away from me, because that did happen to me quite a bit. But I just lived through that, and it's still there, of course. And I was very lucky to get a lot of money from the court case, and because of my brain damage and my physical damage. And so that helped me survive for the next few years, and so on. I got married, whatever, and that was a debacle. But, you know, these things happen. And so I don't know where the car accident comes into it all, but in the end, but it's always there. And I'm always self-conscious and always try to keep my hair covering it a bit and makeup covering it. And I open with a moment in Sydney where somebody was trying to put my hair up on my head, and I felt naked and ashamed. And thanks to Chris Olsen, I wrote that opening part of my chapter, because the wonderful Chris Olsen was running a memoir workshop here at Avid Reader, and some of my mates from that workshop are here as well. And so it's all part of it. She challenged us to write something about an incident in which we became ashamed. And I hadn't really thought about the whole notion of shame. And it's quite a potent thing, because I wasn't a Catholic. I didn't feel guilt or shame all my life, like a lot of Catholics I know did. But it's just, yeah, shame for such a long time that I hid my face. And so that opened up the book for me, which was great, thanks to Chris. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now. Yes.
Thanks. And now you were mentioned in that part of the conversation that that the whole book is entwined with your experience and your love of film. And I wondered if you might read us a little. Do you want me to hold your microphone?
Yes, thank you. Okay, yes, I'll just read you a little bit about going to the movies in the 50s. Okay. This chapter is called Cinema Paradiso. I call every chapter a film title, sorry. Film title. The popular Italian film Cinema Paradiso explored the coming of age of a filmmaker growing up in the late 40s and 50s, entranced by movies flickering in the dark. In this film, the boy helped the projectionists at the local cinema, at the same time being part of a squirming horde of young Sicilians, objecting loudly when any romantic, steamy scenes were obviously cut by order of the local clergy. For much of my life, my passions have been ignited in such darkened places. Recalling the picture theatres I frequented in my childhood, my lifelong love of films was born out of amiable chaos in 50 subtropical suburban Brisbane. Along with a gaggle of cousins, we would head by tram along Ipswich Road for our own form of picture show paradise on most sweltering Saturday afternoons. We didn't refer to these places of film worship as cinemas. They were picture shows or picture theatres, and we went along to see the pictures on the big screen. Skip a bit. During showtime, we youngsters responded loudly and enthusiastically to whatever was happening on the screen, although such antics might be met with much shushing from those wishing to hear all the dialogue. The usual lolly-fueled mayhem ruled. Red, lolly-coated chocolate jaffas rolled down the sloping wooden floors. Hordes of children munched sticky jaw-jamming minties, chucking the wrappers onto the floor, slurping licorice straps and all sorts, blackening tongues, scoring massive sugar hits, aching gums, licking ice creams bought with carefully counted pocket money, loving the newly created chocolate-covered Peter's ice cream on a stick, the sublime Haverheart, all purchased from rather tackily dressed temptresses, flaunting trayfuls of sugar highs at interval. My trusty regular companion, cousin Jan, and I were fangirls, smoothing precious fantail wrappers, tucking these away in our pockets for further study. Fantails, or chocolate-covered caramels, often stuck to my teeth, although that didn't bother me. The sweet taste lingered. Annoying cheeky boys behind us would sometimes kick our bottoms or stick slobbery chewy in our hair. They loved hearing us yelp and scream. We hated the chewing gum marauders, as we knew that later we would have to endure that yucky gum being cut out of our hair by our mums. Nevertheless, there were many upsides. Enjoying our newfound independence, Jan and I clambered onto the Salisbury tram, going home, hopping off at Chardon's Corner. We counted our leftover pennies, heading straight to the corner fish and chip shop, treating ourselves to potato scallops, brushing greasy fingers on our flowery gathered skirts, skipping down the steep hill to the Thompson dwelling. Sprawled on my bed in the front room, we avidly shared our new fantail wrapper stories on the movable feast of favourite crushes. Doris Day, Debbie Reynolds, Robert Wagner, Jeff Hunter, Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter. We did not realise that Drop Dead Gorgeous Rock and Tab were both closeted gays, not even knowing in any case what homosexuality actually was. Occasionally, my sister Jocelyn and I squabbled over who would win the heart of either Rock Hudson or Robert Wagner whenever he or they happened to swoop down from Hollywood claiming one or the other of us in Annerley, Brisbane, Australia. It is strange contemplating such childhood fantasies now, with Rock having died of AIDS and Robert probably still wondering how Natalie Wood died. I didn't like to say he could be the murderer.
So, and there's such a joy in reading that part of the book about your childhood, life in the cinemas. But it stayed with you your whole life. I mean, to the extent that you kind of made this new career in it. And so, what is it about film that? What does it mean for you?
It's very hard not to just give you a whole thesis on that, really. I don't know. It's just I've been entranced by it. I didn't understand about visual literacy or anything like that. It was just something I adored, but really I was more of a book lover in those days, because you didn't study film, you just went to the films, and so it wasn't an academic pursuit. But the fact that it was so visceral and so exciting and part of a culture, and those 50s films, I'm afraid, analyse them a bit, because we saw these rather terrible Westerns just perpetuating racism and colonialism, and we didn't understand any of those words. And even when we saw The Wonderful Jeddah back in the mid-50s, about 56 or 7, and where they didn't have black faces on the Indigenous people here for that Australian film, it was still problematic, and very few films showed the reality of the oppression of the Indigenous people and what their culture was. So even at home, as well as the First Nations people in America, I write a bit about that, and I write a bit about the crazy musicals that we saw, especially when you think of the horrors of the film called Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, where they all got kidnapped and held hostage until they gave in. what is that about? And Jan and I used to follow these films up Ipswich Road. There were 3 cinemas, and the ones we really loved, they would move from the Boomerang to the Annalee, then to the Odeon. So we'd see them 3 weeks in a row. We were bingers before binge was a thing. And then we'd go back to the Boomerang and start again. And so some of those horror films really, when you think about it, and so tacky. But we were being, brainwashed really by American imperialism. And so, it's only now, I can't quite capture in the book my immediate sort of wonder, because all of that is coloured by my academic work. But I haven't made this an academic book. I hope you don't think it's that. But obviously my academic sensibility comes into it a bit, yeah.
Has it spoiled the joy a bit?
I think it probably has.
Yeah.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'd love you to talk a bit about feminism, if you would, because you were an early feminist in this period of history after the war. And I have a feeling that feminism then was a very different thing from what it is now. And so I wondered if you could talk about what it means for you and what changes you've seen, and in the way women view themselves and in the way that women are viewed.
That's a big question too. That's another thesis. Okay, well, just from my point of view, I tried to track it, thanks to Sandra's urging, to build it much more as a theme through the book. So not just to have it coming in the 70s, where I designed my own units at the University of Queensland. When I was teaching there in 1976, I designed the first feminist units to teach in the Diploma of Education there. And so it didn't just happen. So there were things along the way that alerted me to it, but I couldn't articulate it. None of us could. We didn't have the words. We had the emotions. We didn't understand, and so I sort of itemized little things, including some of my friends whose parents didn't want them to go on after grade 10, but they sort of would pay the fees at boys' grammar for their sons who went on through to grade 12 and then to medicine or engineering or whatever. So women always seem to suffer from the gender payout, and they never kind of were the ones chosen back then to stay at school, even though they were very clever. And I was very lucky that my parents sent me on to boarding school for my senior exams, and for 2 years at the end. I didn't like Brisbane Girls' Grammar really much at all, and I certainly didn't want to board there. I hate to say it. Don't think they'll invite me to come and do a board tour somehow. So yeah, it wasn't a good feminist place. No. More the Ipswich Girls' Grammar teachers were wonderful and encouraging and open-minded and helping me become myself. And then I found a beautiful lecturer at the University of Queensland, Felicity Curry, who taught me Nordic noir, really. She taught me all the ancient Nordic poetry from Norway and Iceland in particular, and Old English as well, Anglo-Saxon English, and I thrived on that. I just it was something that I couldn't get enough of, but I also couldn't get enough of Felicity, who was this beautiful, funky woman dressed not at all the way women were supposed to be dressing, because the dress codes at University of Queensland then were shocking, and we were forced to wear dresses and stockings and shit like that, and not even be able to wear jeans and t-shirts and whatever. We finally were allowed to wear pantsuits, but your top of your pantsuit and your bottom of your pantsuit had to actually match. Suddenly people were breaking out and wearing unmatching tops and bottoms, and so this was all part of it. You know, the fashion stuff was part of feminism, making a stand, and yeah, so there were these micro things, but they all sort of built up. And yeah, so at the University of Queensland, where I taught for 5 years, there was feminism bursting forth in sociology and in English literature, as well as in my units in education. And then later, when I taught at QUT, with some good colleagues, we started our own feminist media. I did media studies and they did geography, and they did everything from a feminist point of view, and people could specialize in that feminism, and we won that battle over many years. And then of course suddenly, oh, these are just vanity subjects. You have to get rid of those because they're the ones you love. I thought it was a really good way to get people to do postgraduate work, because a lot of those feminist students that came through my course, they wanted to go on and do further study, but the university didn't like that. So it all had to be watered down. So there are always sort of balances and losses along the way with the feminism. So I chart that a bit. And there's a lot of politics in all that, as at those institutions. And
What
so
do
I
you think
did my
of the
best.
state of feminism in the world at the moment, and you know, and how passionate are you still about it?
Well, I'm a little more critical, I suppose. I don't feel in the thick of it anymore, and I feel a bit embarrassed by that. I think I should get back to that and be more of an advocate. Anyway, I don't know. It's I've written this book now, and hopefully that might inspire a few people to rethink their views a bit. And I don't believe we're post-feminist. That's put there to try and put us down, like, well, it's all over, really. You know, you've all got equality. Well, we haven't. And there's so many different examples every day of women being underpaid and undervalued. So I still have to fight the fight as best I can by supporting the Labor Party and hoping that they will be less misogynistic than our previous government, that I probably shouldn't even begin to talk about.
No,
But,
let's not go there.
Yeah, so
But while you're on politics,
Yeah.
let's go there. You know, you I'm not that particular one, but I'm just thinking people born since 87 probably can't even imagine what it was like to live in Queensland under the National Party governments of Frank Nicklin and Jovial Peterson. And it seems to be, I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but I feel like there isn't a lot written about that time, actually, that we can, you know, certainly not popular books, you know, where that really remind you of how repressive and how frightening those days were. And
yes.
so can you tell us your memories of living as a young person in that political era?
Yeah, well, when I went to the university in the 60s, it was the beginning of the call-up time for Vietnam. And if I'd been a boy, my birthday, 6th of March, came up. And one of Polly's and my friends, he got called up. He had the same birthday as me. We never know till this day. He won't tell us how he got out of it. But, you know, there was all these struggles that, you know, people we knew could have been sent to Vietnam and died. But we think he cut off a toe or pretended to be gay. They were two things you could do to get out of being. Yes. And Polly and I used to go and visit some of these conscientious objectors in a flat in Petrie Terrace. Remember that one? So yeah, the drug culture, my ex-husband was involved in that, and that freaked me out quite a bit, because if someone came to your place and brought marijuana even, the owner of the house could get a 5-year term in jail. So that's how restrictive and terrible and crazy it was. I also got called out, and I've tried to tell the story a little obliquely in the book, because I've been told by Matthew Condon to be very careful what I say. But somebody, a father of one of the girls, I was teaching at Brisbane Girls Grammar when I went back there to teach. He said that Ms. Yeates they hated me being Ms. Yeates. I mean, even something like that was a trigger for some people. And he wanted me to be sacked immediately because I was teaching his daughter that she could choose her own career path. And that was not the case in his home. And luckily, the principal stood up for me. But it was, those sort of things were happening. And people I went to uni with, some of them were so well known as activists, they couldn't get a job in the public service, they couldn't get a job as a teacher, because they'd marched in demonstrations. It was very repressive, and a lot of good people went to live in Sydney and or Melbourne or whatever to escape it. But I like to look, when I look back, I like to think, yes, I was brave and I stayed, and we fooled those idiots who ran the education department. And got the most critical and radical media studies, didn't we, Amy, back then? And so, yes, we beat them because we were smarter than they were. And they thought that critical media studies meant you criticize the media, and they liked that. And so, you know, they didn't get it. They thought it was what they call the inoculation approach to media studies, that we would be inoculating the students against the media. It was a weird sort of Catholic ed crap, but it was kind of, so we played on that and managed to get the most advanced film and television courses in Queensland, much to our friends in the South's astonishment, because we were seen to be total rednecks up here. We were nothing, and yet we won on a number of levels because we played our cards well, having lived under such repression until 1989. So yeah, I guess that helped shape my politics very strongly, very strongly. And I was in the Kelvin Grove branch of the ALP with some of my friends who are here tonight. It was called the KGB back then. And as Bob Hawke said, that's the last thing the Labor Party needs, is a branch called the KGB. We were very much on the left. So, you know, that's what the book's about. But I'm not forcing it down anyone's neck, but it is who I am. So there's an authenticity there in terms of my own pathway there.
And there was
There was a period where you were involved in an interesting revolutionary plan, you and your husband and a group of you. Tell us about that.
Like the free lifestyle.
No, not the free love.
we're coming to that.
The political overthrow.
Oh yes, that one. That my friend Stephen Stockwell, who's watching me from afar, he said, I'd better not put that on the back cover.
Oh,
Because that we tried to overthrow the government by assassinating Malcolm Fraser and his front bench after Whitlam was actually dismissed. So we sat there plotting for months and months, but never could quite get past the drink and the dope and the and we didn't really have any guns, and how we were going to kill these people in the cabinet who caused this terrible coup d'etat. So yes, that was part of what we did very intensely, and yeah, so
Yeah, it was quite an intense sort of underworld, wasn't it?
yes, it was. Yes, but you know, we knew all the 200 people in Brisbane that were worth knowing, and that's what we thought. And Brisbane was a small country town in lots of different ways, which was a bit scary at times because everyone knew who you'd gone out with and where you lived and what your family was, and particularly what school you went to. And I gather that's still a thing in Brisbane.
Yes.
It's scary, isn't it? They still ask you, what school did you go to? You know, as if that means anything. But yes, the whole class system was very easily defined. And I'd sometimes go out with boys who, when they dropped me off at my home, it was a very modest home. I think they're only looking for a wealthy girlfriend, really. And didn't hear from them again. So, you know, there's a bit of that going on. But they're obviously not worth knowing anyway. So there you go.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, but you met Richard Yeates over a mutual passion for civil disobedience and coffee, as you put it in your book. So tell us about, I don't know, the atmosphere of that first meeting and how
Well,
it went with you.
there was a group of us that met every week in the refectory at UQ, and a bunch of people, one of whom went on to become a great documentary filmmaker, actually. But and we would sit there and contemplate what was going on in people still arriving, sorry. What was going on in the student kind of talks at lunchtime, and some of our heroes, like my darling friend Ralph Summy was there, and who had been my tutor in political science, and also Peter Wertheim and back then Dan O'Neill from my English department and others would rouse up and say what was going on and how we had to fight all this. And so we'd sit there as a little self-contained group, but open to people. And Richard and his friend Roger, who'd come from 2 years or 4 years, I think, out of school. So they were already mature age students, a bit older than me. They turned up because they'd heard we were a good group to sit down and talk with about civil disobedience and drink coffee together. So yeah, and yes, we sort of got together pretty quickly, and then crazily got married while we were still students.
Yeah, so tell me about that, because here you were, these, you know, the kind of people who were going to plot an assassination you know, very rebellious and independent in so many ways, but you got married really fast. So tell me about that. How does that work?
Yes, I mean, it's a question of money as well as everything else, the marriage thing. And as a student, we didn't really have any money, and so we were dependent on our families, and neither his family nor my family approved of us living in sin. Our friend Roger, he was the only one we knew who was living in sin. Were you living in sin, Polly? I can't remember.
I was quiet, yes.
On the quiet she was, yeah. Well, we couldn't sort of do it on the quiet because somehow. So anyway, we got married at the cathedral with all the trimmings, the Anglican cathedral. Why not? Hey? And
You had the full white, beautiful, amazing, award-winning dress.
yes, I came second prize in the Easter bride competition.
Oh.
Second prize. These Perumalis. How are we going with that?
We're good, we're good for time, I'm watching, yeah.
Will I read a little bit of that? The marriage thing. Yes. Everyone likes this bit. And I think some of my lovely memoir people, they like this bit. Oops, sorry. Have to bear with me. The dressmaker I employed to make this French-inspired garment. This is about the wedding dress. To make this French-inspired garment had a nervous breakdown in the week leading up to Easter and simply could not finish the gown on time. She said she might be able to finish it next week, which of course was a week too late. Shedding many a tear in disbelief, I picked up this unfinished debacle late on Easter Thursday. My mother Margaret and I panicked as neither of us could sew to save our lives. Our friend helped and some rather clumsy tacking stitches somehow kept the whole back seam and other pieces together. Fortunately, the uneven back of the dress was disguised by my veil, which stretched in a small train behind me. On that Easter wedding weekend, the centre spread of the women's pages in the Sunday Mail newspaper declared that I had been the most modern bride of the day, with a lavish photograph of a windswept me alighting from a sleek limo near the cathedral steps. In the annual Easter bride competition, I was awarded second prize of $30, a very handy sum for newlyweds, with barely a cent between us. After putting our wedding presents to good use, Richard and I enjoyed developing our own little domestic rituals. Noticing that we would set the table at night for our breakfast the following day, Roger, our friend, who was our best man or whatever, Roger once teased us, saying, "Why don't you have breakfast now and save yourselves time?" I sometimes think of that. Okay. It was almost as though Richard and I were playing house, discovering our own ways of being cohabiting adults. One early problem was that I was suffering from that common bridal affliction, honeymoon cystitis, not exactly an auspicious start to a marriage supposedly made in heaven. Furthermore, in the middle of the third night, things turned seriously unpleasant when we woke up to find ourselves drenched in a foul-smelling liquid. Hearing thumping and scratching noises overhead, we realised there was a lodger in the ceiling, a wild possum in the very act of pissing on us. Frantically washing ourselves and changing the sheets and pillowcases, we arranged a couple of umbrellas to shield us from any further desecration. Very romantic. There was no point in moving the bed. The possum had free run of the entire ceiling. In those first few weeks of spending whole nights together, I also discovered that Richard had vivid nightmares and sometimes sleepwalked. I had been told about his sleepwalking antics as a child, but I certainly did not expect both those and the nightmares to recur so regularly, and in the latter case with so much ferocity. Occasionally I would wake in fright, with Richard crying out, eyes vacant, practically strangling me, his hands firmly round my neck. Somehow I managed to wake him and escape just in time. It seemed that the nightmares arose out of his fears of being conscripted for the Vietnam War. And in those dreams, he was fighting an unseen enemy. He probably needed some kind of calming therapy, but that wasn't readily available in those days. Cystitis, a shambolic wedding dress, a pissing possum, and nearly being strangled in my sleep. These were not the most promising omens of a life of marital bliss. We did last 10 years somehow.
And that was and that was the era of free love. And so and how did that work out? That was kind of those days where tell us the deal, Helen.
Tell us the deal.
Tell us the deal.
I mean, we like to think we were very advanced, you know, we were sort of cutting edge. We believed in zero population growth. We believed in, you know, radical movements and feminism and so on. But when it came to love, I was very much monogamous. And monogamy was a bad word then and well into the 80s. you couldn't admit you're a couple, really, but we had to sort of admit we were married couple. But yes, became very problematic, and so I don't know. It was a sort of Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir kind of thing, where we would have this amazing life. But of course, we weren't in Paris. We were only in Brisbane. It makes a difference. And, live in the same hotel, and meet up with our friends like Albert Camus in a cafe on the left bank and have this extraordinary urban life. But we lived in Rainworth in Brisbane, so it was not the same. And but it was sort of what we wanted at one level theoretically, but I never wanted it in practice. And it was hard going. Richard would always claim I was the only love of his life, but there were a lot of women out there, and it was he had the pick, it seemed, where he worked, and so whatever. And he would claim he was a better feminist than me because he believed in free love. I don't know about that, but I mean, the feminism was on the rise along with free love, and the sexual revolution was burbling up, and so it was all, the pressures were very strong. And I did take another lover, but that was, Richard and I would have this menage a trois, but it was a kind of power struggle all the time. And because I was very open about that, because that's what I wanted him to be. I was always open. But free love doesn't always mean freely open to each other and honest. And playing games nearly drove me mad. And so it was 10 years of fraught Ice Storm. I call one of the marriage chapters Ice Storm. I call the other one Scenes from a Marriage. The films, I guess some of you, that I based those the sort of almost elegiac look at marriage from my point of view. And then after that, the chapter is called Lust Caution. So I was out there after 10 years of marriage as a free range person. And it was tricky times, very tricky times. And we did our best, didn't we, Jenny and Dan and everyone? Yeah, we wanted to be very, very in the mode. And we couldn't help it, but hurt was always just around the corner. As Othello says towards the end at the very end of Shakespeare's Othello, I loved not wisely, but too well. And that certainly seems to sum me up a bit. Yeah, made bad choices. Yeah. Actually.
Thanks, Helen. If we're going, we are going to give you time to answer questions, and so I should stop asking them myself now.
Okay,
but thank you very much for.
Here we go.
Said so. It's just what do we do with microphones?
Well, we can't really pass these ones around because they're on cords. But if you could repeat it,
I'll
with
repeat
the
the
microphone
question.
just so Zoom could hear. That would be
Yes, sure.
Do we have any questions for Helen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there, Helen, any particular time, circumstance, or that this might be hard because it's not something one necessarily thinks about, that you found to be particularly illuminating in your life?
The question was, is there any time you found particularly illuminating in your life?
Illuminating.
Yeah,
It's a good question.
In terms of all your interests that brought together or shed new light on it.
Yeah. I think in the late 80s, I sort of became more confident in my academic life. That's when that started. And I started to get a proper direction in career-wise. So I think the career and the personal kind of went together, and I became more confident. But I think I turned off quite a few people because of my feminism. that has always been an issue. But I boldly embraced that and didn't really not be a feminist, just to suit the politics of the time, you know, when things got problematic at QUT or whatever. It, yeah, being a feminist was a bit of a dirty word even there, you know. I was refused in the Faculty of Business. I didn't say this in the book. I have to be a bit careful who's going to might sue me, I suppose. When I was going to go to a wonderful conference in Arizona, run by these terrific women who from all over the world, a wonderful feminist conference. When I started going to those conferences, it was wonderful, but I was not allowed to go to that because the smug dean said to me, "We don't do feminism in the Faculty of Business," you know. So, and so it was always a fight, but occasionally I won those fights, and I put that down in the book that I could blossom as a feminist more internationally than locally. It was strange in a way. I was recognised much more, you know, by people who respected me with my work on masculinities and feminism much more than locally, where I was more dismissed. So I suppose it was that hard work of getting myself out there, giving papers at conferences around the world and publishing and so on, that all helped give me that illumination, I guess, as to who I was really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question
How
at the
much
back.
influence has your brother Peter Thompson had on your life and on your writing of this memoir?
Question was, how much influence has your brother Peter Thompson had on your life and the writing of this memoir?
Yes, well, Peter's a great writer, of course, and a champion editor from way back, being an editor of one of the great London newspapers. And he's written well over 25 books, I think. And so, you know, I asked him about issues like chronology, because I was wanting it to be a bit more experimental and not be, you know, this happened, then that happened, and that happened. But he said, in the end, it all comes down to chronology. People have to be able to follow that. So I had to sort of give in on that. He gave me good advice on things like that, having written his own memoir, but he also had written many biographies as well. So yeah, it's a structure is complicated, and this was one of the issues with the book that I wrestled with for quite a while. And yeah, it all came together, and thanks to a number of people in the room who did a bit of a reading from time to time and helped me, like Jan and Janetta and Susan and others. So yeah, and Peter, of course, was always there encouraging me. And you know, I'd ask him, what were the films we used to see way back? I couldn't remember all the cartoons, and he remembered a whole swing of cartoons, you know. So it's sort of, I crossed over memories with him, because his memory is so extraordinary. Yeah, a bit like Hugh Lunn, our mutual friend, who also, you know, charged me up with his own memoirs as well. So Peter's writing, Peter's mentorship there for a while, for sure, helped me a lot. He's a great example. Yeah.
We've actually had some questions come through on Zoom, so I'll just read those out. So this is from Lisa and Lily. How do you feel now after having written the book? And as a postscript, P.S. Lisa wants to ask, will we ever make it to New York again together? But yeah, how do you feel
New
now
York,
having written the
yes.
book?
How do I feel? It's been a bit of a bumpy ride, even post-book. But I was so lucky to have, where's Chris Cosgrove? stand up, darling Chris. He helped me so much in getting it together, sort of, you know, technically. And he also designed the cover of the book. So
Which is gorgeous.
yeah.
Mm.
he also edited my video montage, my film, back in 2012. And this cover was actually the DVD cover of that film that we made back then. So yeah, we have a long-standing working relationship, a former brilliant student and friend who helped me with all the photographs that went into the book, and you know, a lot of toing and froing with the printer, but always Chris was there helping me with those final sort of hiccup things that drove me a little crazy, I think. I think my mental health went down a bit at times, and yeah, it's a slow burn, the book. It takes a lot out of you. And as the wonderful Chris Olsen said during our workshops, there'll be lots of tears and lots of therapy. And she's right. You know, writing memoir can, you know, it brings back things that you thought you'd forgotten, whatever, you know. And yeah, I'm surprised what I could remember. And in the end, I sort of saw it as almost like a documentary film that I was making, but you can read about that analogy at the end of the book. Yeah.
Is there another question over here at the front?
Yes, as a friend of later years, there's not a week goes past when we're lunching at Tognini's that someone doesn't come up and recognise you so very fondly. And it's given me a greater appreciation of your work.
Mm.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's lovely when former students come up and
Yes.
out of the blue. Thank you. Yes, I'm very privileged that people remember me over so many years. Yeah, I've been around a long time, it would seem. I haven't quite gone off into the sunset yet, have I, Stephen? Yes, Jane.
Is there one particular thing that inspired you to write these memoirs?
Yeah, good question. I just, it was sort of coming upon me when I was doing that creative work about my favorite sex scenes, and that brought back a lot of sex stuff for me. And so there's a kind of meta narrative in that film about my own personal yearnings and disappointments and fucking whatever. And so it's sort of, that was autobiographical in its own way. And then Phoebe Hart, the wonderful Phoebe's here now, and made a documentary about me for when I won a big award from the Australian Teachers of Media. Thank you, Amy. And yeah, that documentary, people talking about me and my life's work, also helped, you know, made me think, well, maybe I do have something to say, not just from a work point of view, but also from a personal point of view. And not many people have written about Brisbane in the 70s and 80s that we know about. Maybe they have in quite the same way, 60s, 70s and 80s, those times, which were quite fraught. And, but, you know, the 60s, it was all happening. People were putting the keys on the floor and, you know, all of those awful sort of key game things, and sort of wife swapping, which is a hideous expression when you think about it from a feminist point of view. It's as if the wife's the chattel that you just swapped around. But yeah, so all of that was all part of the sexual revolution. But I have friends my age who said, somehow or other, the sexual revolution passed me by. And I think that's fair enough, because they went on a different path from me and got married early, had children, now happy grandchildren, great-grandchildren, whatever. And that's their choice. And they didn't muck around like I did, or so I just they were always incredibly, even my conservative friends were always very accepting of me, which I really cherish. You know.
Alrighty, well, I think that's all we have
Is that all
time
we
for.
have time for?
Sandra, did you have any final words?
No, just to thank you, Helen, very much for your openness and for your wonderful book and your memories.
And thank all of you for coming. Thank you. All right, so as I mentioned before, we will have Helen signing some copies. If you could all do us a huge favor and just double